sort of a follow-up video to the couple of cafe videos I made earlier, a week or so ago. Hope I can be heard here. I mentioned in the previous couple of videos that it's an interesting experiment to sort of dramatize one's own sufferings, one's own petty sufferings, I suppose one could call them, although they don't seem terribly petty at the time, to sort of alter their nature, sort of add a certain degree of soulfulness or, again, drama to them, and it kind of transforms them. We can kind of, it's not really so much wallowing in one's suffering as sort of believing that there's some sort of meaning to it. As they say, it's not suffering that's the big deal, it's meaningless suffering that's the problem. And I'm of the view that meaning is only to be found within oneself. You can only sort of create or bring about one's own meaning. And that's interesting. If I create my own meaning and I place value on my own suffering, that gives me an awful lot of scope to actually control my own experience of my life, my own existence, I suppose. A lot of freedom when you think about it. Looking back on the period of jet lag that I just sort of snapped out of finally, it was brutal for the first 4 or 5 days. I eventually got over it, but as I was suffering from it, and it really is a nasty feeling, nagging. It's almost like having chronic insomnia mixed with chronic anxiety. I'm sort of analyzing it in hindsight and sort of thinking, it was kind of neat to be in that fog, because it's so different from the way that I normally exist. I look back on my experiences of the last couple of weeks, and in the grand scheme of things, it's almost a non-existent sort of series of feelings, or non-existent, I shouldn't say, but irrelevant series of feelings that I, one of 7 billion humans, had of a type of suffering that I brought upon myself, and that is harmless in the grand scheme of things, and that other people, presumably other people who at least have physical problems, may be in a position of greater suffering than I am. Or I was at the time, but it was still interesting to experience it in a kind of an analytical, experimental mode, and try and, I guess, sublimate it. And as I say, looking back, it actually seems like a neat experience to have gone through. I'm one of the few people that I always say this, I'm one of the few people who seems to have actually had his life improved by a brush with severe depression and anxiety a quarter century ago. Not so much it's all downhill after that, it's just you learn things when you suffer, and these things are useful lessons that can come in handy later in life. Did I put that to use when I was suffering from temporary jet lag and anxiety and insomnia and nervousness and depression and everything? I don't know. But I mentioned before, where does the past exist, or what is the past? If I'm looking right now from the vantage point of the present, whatever that means, into the past, and I see something that actually seems to have some sort of value or make sense to me or have some sort of meaning or some sort of valued addition to the overall canvas of my life, what does that actually do to what the past's fundamental nature is? As I mentioned previously, there's something Orwellian about that. It's like, who controls the present controls the past. But I'm talking about my own present and my own past, not everybody else's, not some sort of collective one. So, but if from the point of view of a psychological sort of study of oneself, if you're looking at your own past, and and you have fond memories of something that something in you understands you really wouldn't want to go through again if you had the choice. This disconnect between all normal standards of judging one's own well-being or one's own state and what one's actual experience of these things is, it really makes itself manifest. For example, I know that I didn't really enjoy myself when I was wandering aimlessly for several week and a half almost in a weird funk, agitated and yet tired and unable to sleep and depressed and everything. I know that that's not enjoyable and I don't want to do it again. But I look back on it and there's this, I won't call it a nostalgia, but an interesting sort of, it's an interesting feeling. It's an interesting thing. I'd like to go back to it in my mind, in just in a small way. It's not terribly significant or anything like that. But I suppose the way I would phrase it is I don't regret having done any of that, and I'm rather glad that it happened. Not so much the causes of it, but the actual experience of going through jet lag and decompression after a hemisphere switch. What does that say about what each of us as individuals, what our past actually is? And does what the past actually is change all the time? I would assume that it does, because the point of view from which you see the past always changes. The past is as malleable, I guess, as the future when you think about it that way, even though, in a certain sense it's set. What happened is what happened. But the value of it all, now that, I think, is the more I deal with this issue, the more elastic it seems to be, the more malleable it seems to be, the value. If you're, I'm 51, and I notice that a lot of people at my age are sort of, I wouldn't really say getting bitter about life, but sort of saying, well, that was good. It's just beginning, I guess, at my age. People kind of feel like they've lived their lives. I don't feel that way. I feel like I've got an enormous amount ahead of me, and that I'm living a fairly significant part of my life, or living through a significant period of my life right now. And how much would that attitude color the past? For example, somebody who's kind of jaded with life would may have the tendency to think, the good times are all over. Or somebody who's jaded with life will look back and say, things kind of are slowing down now, and that kind of makes me think that really all of this was in vain, really. It really didn't have any meaning to it. And I guess the two moods can fluctuate inside of the same person. You can sort of look back on your past one day and think, that was a very interesting past I've got, or, middle age, that was a very interesting youth that I had. Or you can, the next day you can think it's all a waste of time, completely futile, whatever. Does the past have one particular value? Does it have one particular measurable quality to it? What is it? Where is it? If the past itself keeps sort of changing, and not in terms of what the overt events were that took place, but in terms of its value, in terms of whether or not you think it was a good or a bad past to have, if you know what I mean. What does that mean? What does that mean in terms of any absolutes? Well, I guess we know what that means, but what does it mean in terms of our ability to actually control the value not just of our present existence, but the value of our actual past? And I'm not talking about lying to oneself either, or an optimism bias. For example, when I look back on a period of jet lag, I don't really want to go back there. But by the same token, I can't say that my memories of it, even if the experience of it was lousy, the memories of it are not necessarily bad. Something new was taking place, or something at least out of the ordinary. That in and of itself is interesting. I don't know. Makes you think, really. I'm often saying that just because I don't believe that what my senses tell me is necessarily true, or that I don't rely on things like logic or whatever, that I'm certainly not a solipsist. And by the same token, just because I'm not really sure as to what value we can actually place on our own past, that it is without value. Rather, it's changeable, it's malleable, and what is the source of this malleability? What causes that, or what brings it about, or what enables it? I suppose one could look at it that way. What enables us to actually peer back into the past and change our experience of it, or change the effect that it has had on us in the present. Again, whatever that is. Difficult to get this thought out sitting here doing an off-the-cuff video, but there you are. I'll upload it anyway.